hurt?
Yeah.
Yeah? Who took you to the hospital?
My daddy, my mommy, my brother.
So where in your house is the mousetrap?
It's up at our, down in the basement.
Down in the basement. What is it next to in the basement?
It's next to the firewood.
Anyway, what you see here is a child who's giving you a lot of perceptual detail. He's telling you where the mousetrap was. It was next to a wood pile in the basement. He had gone down there because he wanted to tell his dad, who was down there collecting firewood, that he was ready for lunch. He gets in an argument with his brother Colin, which he later goes on to describe. They were fighting over some action figure. Colin pushes him next to the wood pile. He doesn't see where his hand's going, and it gets caught in a mousetrap.
Were you surprised at the answers you got?
I think it's fair to say that my colleagues and I were absolutely shocked that by the 10th week, not only were they assenting to some of these things that didn't occur, but they were giving very coherent narratives, highly elaborated narratives that are, I think, quite persuadable.
By the time I met the same boy, it was weeks after the experiment, but he still could give lots of convincing details about things that never happened.
Was there a time when you got your finger caught in a mousetrap and had to go to the hospital? Wow, which finger was it?
Remember, this is the result after a researcher simply asked the question once a week for 10 weeks. In real abuse cases, kids are questioned for years, often by parents, doctors, then by the investigator, perhaps a therapist, then by lawyers.
Who went with you to the hospital?
My mom and my dad and my brother Colin, but not my baby. He was in my mom's tummy.
Your baby
This
brother.
boy's testimony is even more remarkable because just a few days earlier, his father had discussed the experiment with him. He'd explained that it was just a test and the whole mousetrap event had never happened. The boy agreed it was just in his imagination. Still, listen to this.
Let me ask you, did your father tell you something about the mousetrap finger story?
No,
Is it true? Did it really happen?
It wasn't a story.
It
really happened.
It's really happened? You really got your finger caught? It's really happened?
Yeah.
I assume the child isn't lying. They aren't intentionally making up stories.
Absolutely. I think they've come to believe it. It is part of their belief system.
Some experts believe they'd come closer to the truth using anatomically correct dolls. With dolls, they wouldn't have to ask so many questions. But Cece's colleague, Dr. Maggie Brooke, conducted tests that led her to conclude using dolls also leads kids on.
I would think anatomically correct dolls would be a good, neutral way to ask questions.
I thought the very same way, but after having had this experience, I'm not quite sure how you do that.
Brooke had this pediatrician add some extra steps to his routine physical examination of preschool kids. He measures the child's wrists with a ribbon. He puts a little label on the child's stomach, and he tickles the child's foot with a stick. Never does the doctor go anywhere near the child's private parts. Then, right after the exam, using an anatomically correct doll, Brooke asks leading questions about the doctor's exam.
Can you show me on the doll how Dr. Emmett touched your vagina?
No, he didn't know my vagina.
He didn't.
The child tells the truth. But just a few days later, when Dr. Brooke and the child's father again ask about the doctor's visit, it's a different story. Before Brooke has a chance to even bring out the doll, the child shows how the doctor had strangled her with the ribbon.
He did this.
You put that around your neck?
Tight.
Like that?
He did it tight. So tight.
And watch what happens when the doll's brought out. She's asked to explain what the doctor did that day.
So what did he do?
He put a stick in my vagina.
He put a stick in your vagina?
Yeah.
Just like that?
It gets even more violent. She claims the doctor hammered the stick into her vagina. Then she shows how the doctor examined her.
He looked where?
My hiney.
He did look in your hiney?
Of course, none of it is true. Dr. Brooke found that when dolls were used, half the kids who'd never had their private parts touched claimed the doctor had touched them. These tests make Dr. Brooke question some of the recent testimony by children in court.
Do you think there are dozens of people in jail now who are totally innocent?
Yes, I do.
The researchers' findings are only beginning to be heard in courtrooms. Most prosecutors still argue that children wouldn't lie. Prosecutors want to put Kelly Michaels back in jail. In a few months, they plan to retry her with the same charges.
I will fight to the end because I am an innocent woman and I can look anyone in the eye, and if I have to fight to the rest of my life, then I will do that. So I'm prepared for whatever will happen.
You don't sound scared.
No, I'm not scared. I'm angry and I'm outraged, but I'm not scared.
The Sousas are planning an appeal of their own. Like Kelly Michaels, they believe a day will come when the courts and their grandchildren realize the truth.
When those kiddos grow up, when they become adults, they're going to realize that these things never happened between Shirley and I and them. And I know that they're going to realize that. They're bright children, and they have a mind of their own. And when nobody's prompting them, when they grow up, they can remember and will embrace.
Well, John, you know, I remember I first worried about this sort of thing after some of the early cases that we reported. But children can be so convincing. How do we separate out when they're telling the truth from when they're not?
There is no good way. There are all kinds of experts who will testify in court as paid expert witnesses. And they often say they can tell, but Dr. Cece ran a test where he showed them tapes of kids, some of whom were lying, some were not. And the experts would say, oh, I can tell, but what they said was wrong half the time, in fact, more than half the time. So they did worse than chance.
Clearly, there are real cases of sexual abuse of children, and we have to address that.
Yes, and Dr. Cece won't testify on behalf of the defense because he's afraid he'll let a real molester off because of this. But it's important not to influence the children, and Cece says to test an alternative hypothesis. In other words, to ask the child, well, Joe did this to you, and then what did Jane do to you? If the child starts talking about more people, then at least you have a reason to be suspicious.